Okay, I can start. Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, my name is Brent Strickland. And then I thought for this talk that I might just give you a broad overview of what I do and my research and who I am. So I'm a permanent researcher, a tenured researcher at the CNRS in France, and I work at the École Normale Supérieure. And I'm also an affiliate professor at Mohammed VI Polytechnical University in Morocco, where I founded the School of Collective Intelligence. I was the initial scientific director there, and then I moved back. I kind of migrated back to my primary university in France. And the name of my research lab is the Institut Jean Nico. And in the last couple of years, I've been kind of founding a new research group where we apply insights from cognitive science to produce real world economic and societal impact. So I just give you like a little bit of backgrounds. My primary research is on the topic of core cognition. This is my basic research that I'm not really going to talk much about today. This kind of area of research, it looks at universal forms of nonverbal cognition. So for example, early emerging understanding of objects or number or the social world. And it examines how these kind of innate representations remain active throughout the lifespan. And the idea is that evolution by natural selection has endowed the human mind with certain fairly sophisticated cognitive capacities, and those help to get learning off the ground, and they can continue to exert an influence throughout the lifespan. So I study core cognition from the perspective of young infants in development, and then I examine how you can find some surprising overlap between early emerging kind of cognitive capacities in preverbal infants and kind of automatic processes in adult visual attention. So I look at how adults perceive objects or how they perceive interactions between physical objects. And then I also look to see at how core cognition influences the world's languages. So for example, we ask why is it that more than a third of the world's languages grammatically encode the animate-inanimate distinction. That's a surprising fact about the world's languages, and we think that that's a product of some of these forms of nonverbal core cognition influencing linguistic structure. So there's another line of my research that kind of asks that question. In 2017, I did my PhD at Yale University, finished it in 2013, and then from 2013 to 2017, I just operated as a basic researcher. And then in 2017, my life sort of changed, and I became an entrepreneur. I got involved in the Macron elections in France, the first presidential elections for Macron, and I created a consulting company where we applied insights from cognitive psychology in the political domain. So we did door-to-door campaigns, kind of following the Obama method, and then we would teach people, kind of inspired by some of the literature in social psychology, we would teach people to be more effective in their exchanges with voters. I created a radio show about how to combat fake news, which is still going, is quite successful. And I created this through this consulting company. I also created this university department in Morocco, and we've also done some corporate work, primarily with OCP, which is the Office Séraphin de Phosphates. They're responsible for about 2% of Morocco's GDP, and they do phosphate and fertilizer. But it's a very progressive company, and they're trying to transit. So we've been applying some insights into organizational transition, going from more vertical types of management structures to more horizontal types of management structures. So I was kind of an entrepreneur and a scientist for a while, and now I've kind of taken some of the insights from those real world experiences and now kind of applying them in this new wave of research around applied cognitive science. So I'll tell you about 3 different kinds of activities that we're doing, and then the we there refers to me and my students. and then also some collaborators both on the French side and on the Moroccan side. So basically, there's three big types of activities. So the first one is that we are carrying out experimental research that is looking at human cognition and trying to understand how the fundamental aspects of human cognition might affect human behavior at scale, both at a societal level and within large organizations, so that we can make a better society and better organizations. The second one is creating and testing scalable technology. So the idea there is to take insight from core cognition and from these fundamentals of human cognition in order to modify behaviors in a desirable way. And then we also have a sort of think tank type activity where we're exploring new ideas and approaches focused on societal and organizational change. So I'll try to give some examples of each of those. I had a choice between trying to be exhaustive and show you everything, or try to be selective and show you the things that I thought would be most relevant to this group, and I chose the second option. So I'm not going to show you all the research that's happening, but instead I've just kind of picked and chose, thinking also about some of the information that I got from Amit about your current activities, and I'm going to try to highlight some areas where I think there could be overlapping interest. So the framework here that I've kind of designed is to think of core cognition as a key in navigating societal transition. So the world and a lot of also big organizations are confronted with a lot of major challenges: the lack of trust in democracy, climate change, immigration, and then if you look, for example, across a number of countries, there's a fundamental lack of trust in democratic institutions in America and in Europe and in Africa, and that's not something that's limited to a single individual country, but that seems to be something that's happening at scale across the world. And the idea here is that if we, potentially the core cognition, which are the universal aspects of human cognition, can potentially provide some unique insight into these sort of scalable these behaviors and these phenomena that are happening at scale.
I just want to mention, I have strategic interest in potentially this thing about role of cognition in the context of changing societal behavior, in the context of climate change and extreme events.
Yeah, cool.
So in general, probably the focus will be more on the scientific aspects of it, but I think that if you go after a large proposal, it'd be good to have, I don't know whether it makes sense to have a European partner, but certainly find somebody in the US, if not, if that the format is not possible, to incorporate that aspect of whatever the scientific analysis and finding would be, such as predicting or after climate change, change in the temperature and various parameters to the likelihood of extreme events, and then adaptation related.
Sure. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
And the role of changing behavior of affected people could be one of the interesting aspects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I have a colleague, Guillaume Desakash, who we tried to recruit unsuccessfully for the School of Collective Intelligence, but this is exactly what he studies: is human cognition under conditions of stress and resource scarcity.
Okay.
And then he takes an evolved evolutionary psychology perspective on that, and then looks to see how certain evolved mechanisms are likely to respond when stressed, essentially, and how that might produce conflict, and also how people might under stress find ways to avoid conflict.
Where is he located?
He's located in France, and he is at the it's the Université de Clermont-Ferrand.
Close. I Lyon.
Lyon. Okay. Yeah. I could definitely. That's like, I think that he would be an expert on that particular topic. So he might be the relevant person for me to put you in contact with.
I have a question, since we already just started to interrupt you. Sorry.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
You say the fundamental aspect of human condition, right?
Yeah.
But are they not based on culture? So can you really think that do you really think as a scientist that they transcend different society the same way? We understand things the same way in Europe, the way we do in China, the way we do in Africa.
Well, there's both, I think. So like, you know, if you think about our understanding of the behavior of physical objects,
Yeah, physics is the same.
yeah, but also like social groups. So for example, like if you think about the us versus them, you know, there's an idea that there's an idea that there can be an in group and an out group, and that you're gonna be you're gonna act more favorably towards people that you consider to be a member of your own group, as opposed to people that you consider not to be a member of your own group. That seems to be a universal across human cultures. But then for which, you know, in which different cultures will differ about who they consider to be the in group and the out group. But the fact that there is such a thing as like an us and a them psychologically, that seems to be totally universal.
Okay.
So you get
the perception for sure, the reaction to that is.
But also I think in social cognition, or for example, like reasoning about intentions and desires and beliefs, those kind of basic basic notions. And so like, for example, I might think that you believe that it's raining outside, and you might be wrong about that, but I know that you can have a counterfactual belief, and I might predict something about your behavior on the basis of that. That's called theory of mind. And that is totally universal across. So yeah, I do think that there are certain basic fundamental kind of building blocks to human cognition that transverse the human species. And then there is cultural variation that is kind of added on top of that.
Okay. So interesting. I want to tell you what. Definitely, it's a controversial topic. Like it's really interesting.
Yeah, but I think there's some of the best evidence for the universals comes from babies.
Yeah, makes sense. You know that I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I have a skeptical reaction, but because I am in the wrong side of the Dunning-Kruger group, so don't take it. I know nothing about these things. So
okay. Just, all right, no problem.
Really?
Yeah,
you expect that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, so like to give kind of, I guess by analogy, you could think about evolved psychology and how it might play out in modern context. And I guess this is relevant to that, to the point that you're just making. So if you think about, for example, sugar, there are people who claim that we have an evolved psychology to seek out certain types of foods which were scarce in the environments in which we evolved. For example, sugar was scarce, and it was something that people's bodies needed. But then if you put us in a modern environment, those same mechanisms that push us to, or that kind of drive us to want to eat sugar, can cause obesity and diabetes and different sorts of health problems. So it can be interesting to take this perspective on evolved psychology, but then placed in a modern environment, and see in some cases how that might go wrong. So yeah, so this, I'm going to just like skip through that, and then that perspective is one that we take in looking at information transmission on social media and fake news and conspiracy theories. So I want to kind of highlight that first aspect of our work. So yes.
Can you share the screen? It's frozen.
Oh, it's frozen. Okay. Okay. Seems like it's moving again. Okay. Oh, I see. But on the Zoom, it's frozen. I see.
You are connected directly to that.
Okay. So.
Yeah. How are you able to project this time? Is it working now?
Yes. Yesterday, Ricardo.
Okay, this is odd. I can't move my mouse cursor.
You will learn from that. How can none of you guys do it?
They don't have a PhD yet.
Huh?
They don't have a PhD yet. I just rejected the idea.
They need the active, being active, and you know. Come on, none of them.
Literally just
all of them are capable of it. Women should not defer all these things to men. You guys also should, you know, the technical thing. You know, they are always waiting, you know, for guys to do. No, hey.
Yeah. I'm putting them in such a bad light.
Okay. Is it working now? Yeah. Okay. And then here, let me try to move this out of the way again. Hi, is it? Let's see. Show video panel. Do you know how to move this thing out of the way?
Again,
Do you know how to move this this
just
bar out of the way?
remove, stay away from it, and it will disappear.
Okay, it just disappears right on its own. Okay. There we go. Yeah, so we take this perspective of core cognition and evolved human psychology, and trying to analyze some of the psychology and the motivational factors that underlie the spread of information on social media, as well as the spread of false information on social media. So that's the one I'm going to focus on in this axis of research. The framework here is that of Jonathan Haidt, who made, I think, a controversial claim, but also an interesting claim, that there's an evolved sense of human morality based on fundamental pillars. Those pillars are things like harm, fairness, in-group loyalty, sensitivity to authority, and also moral purity. And you can show both in America and across a range of cultures that across these 5 parameters that you get a political split. So basically what ends up happening is that in highly educated metropolitan communities and towns, people tend to put more emphasis on harm and fairness at the expense of.
What does it mean? So liberal people and high moral, what does it, high harm, what does it mean?
So yeah, so if you're on the y-axis there, what they're plotting is the sensitivity to a specific moral foundation. So they'll ask questions like, for example, if you were to have a child, to what extent do you think it's important to teach your child to not harm others on a scale of 1 to 7? Or they also do it for pets and animals. If you had a dog, to what extent would you want to train yourself to be loyal to its master? That would be a test of authority. To what extent do you think it's important to be loyal to one's own group? So you can get people's subjective ratings on that, and then you also get their assessments or their reports of how liberal or conservative they are on a kind of a standardized political scale. And then what you see in America, but you also see it in Europe, and you also see it. I've run these studies in Africa, or the Senegalese population, for example, and you get exactly the same sorts of splits. That the more metropolitan, educated communities tend to be high on harm and fairness, and low on like loyalty, essentially is in group, respect of authority, and respect of purity norms. And then as you go more conservative, and therefore usually more rural and less educated, they tend to balance out. So you see that same pattern across a number of countries.
So what is the implication of authority and I think this is what purity being somewhat close by for everyone?
If you're conservative.
No, if you're conservative or liberal, there is, there seem to be converging there, but there is a huge difference on the.
Well, so on the x-axis, what you're plotting is the political orientation, the self-reported political orientation of the participants.
The difference here is much larger on these 2 aspects and much less on these 2 aspects.
Yeah.
These 4 aspects actually.
So I don't think there's a very good answer as to why that's the case, why you get that interesting pattern. There's some idea that people's environments in terms of the type of city they live in, type of the social environment that they're around, or maybe the educational environment, that has a systematic influence on the priorities that people are going to generate in terms of the moral norms. And there's also the idea that each individual moral norm, it evolved to respond to very specific evolutionary challenges. So for example, fairness, there's a tendency as an individual to want to cheat. Like if you make a deal with someone, you receive something, but then to not reciprocate and to not give something back. That's a cheating behavior that can be beneficial to yourself, but you wouldn't have it's hard to have a community that could operate in that way, in a cooperative fashion. So the moral norm is kind of evolved to force people in a way, or to incentivize people at a community level to not act selfishly, and instead to act in the service of the community. So purity is it's meant to be a norm that's evolved to avoid infection. So it would be things like hand washing, taking off one's shoes when you go into the house. And then what I think some people have claimed is that purity norm has been transformed differently in different communities. So you can have people who respond to environmental purity, to racial purity. So there's kind of a purity principle, and then how that plays out can change from one community to another.
Yeah, but for example, let's say religious customs of having the burqa or veil,
Yeah.
or requiring male to always accompany in Afghanistan, let's say, are they purity things, or they're not purity?
I think it's going to depend on the individual norm. I think there could be some that would be seen as being a purity norm, and there could be others that might be a fairness norm, or a harm norm. So it's not just because it's a religious norm that it necessarily ends up being a purity norm. So for like eating halal in Islam, that I think would be considered to be a purity norm. But that could also be partially authority, because you have a religious authority that's prescribing that you obey that. So I'm not saying that all of this is right. I'm just saying that this is kind of the general view that we take, that there are evolved moral foundations, and then you might discuss like what are the individual foundations, and then I think some people have said, oh, well, there's also a liberty norm, or there's also other norms that can go into this.
These are all adults, right?
So this is all adults, and then I put a picture of a baby up here because there's also evidence that at early ages, infants, pre-verbal infants, show sensitivity to at least some of these norms. So that's been studied both for I'm not going to go into the details of this, but this is showing that infants are sensitive to harm.
If you hurt someone in front of the kid would be sad.
Yeah, if an agent is trying to achieve a goal, and then there's another object that hinders it from achieving that goal, infants will disprefer that character to a neutral character. Whereas if there's an object that's helping another object achieve its goal, then they'll prefer that object to a neutral object. And then there's been some other more recent research that I'm not going to talk about at all, showing that infants are sensitive to fairness, and also to in-group loyalty, or in-group preference.
Cynic.
I'm sorry?
They're less cynic.
I wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't say that. So basically what they expect is like, generally there's resource distribution in these things. And then what you're doing is assessing through looking times, in which cases they're likely to be surprised, and in which cases their expectations are followed. And so what they expect is that if there's resources that are going to be divvied out, that an equal proportion is going to be given to the different people who are present. But if you alter the color of the characters, so that like there's like a blue team and a red team, they'll expect that someone's going to give more resources to their own team than to a team that's not their own. And there hasn't been much work on authority and purity, which is an interesting sociological phenomenon, because I think social psychologists tend to be very left-leaning. And so they focus on the left-leaning moral principles at the expense of focusing on the right-leaning moral principles. That's at least my hypothesis. Okay, so this isn't my own research, but I'm just kind of giving a little bit of the background. But it's interesting to have this discussion with people who haven't necessarily been exposed to it.
Actually, it so happens that our research in the that we did earlier system called Trees, which where we use it for election monitoring. We correctly predicted Brexit. We correctly predicted 2012 and 2016 elections. And one of the pioneering work was in emotion, sentiment, but also emotion. And so we did the first large-scale machine learning algorithm for emotion identification. And that actually is now a company called Cognitive Labs.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all this stuff is definitely related to politics. So I'll just give you just to give a sense of how I applied, how some of this can be applied. One of the things that I did when I was in Senegal, when I was working in Senegal, is I ran that study, but on the Senegalese population. And then we used this kind of map of people's moral values. I was working with the minister of I want to say it's like the minister of communication, because they had someone who's kind of responsible for all the communications, and he was active in the campaign. So we took these moral principles and this map of moral principles, and then we also got people's perceptions of, like, do you think that Macky Sall, who is currently he's the current president of Senegal, who we work for, do you think that Macky Sall is fair to others? Do you think that he's loyal to the country of Senegal? So we asked people what values they cared about, and then how they perceived the presidential candidate, and then on the cases where he was weak with respect to, so people said, oh, like, we really care about moral purity, but they thought that Macky Sall was low on moral purity. We knew that was a perception trait that we needed to enhance for the presidential candidate, and that ended up being successful because we won the election. So yeah, so in this project we're looking at value systems as a way of creating a kind of tribal identity, and we think that this is also a commonality across human cultures. So if you think, about this notion of there's an in group, there's an us, and there's a them. Often, what ends up defining the us is a sense of shared moral values, and people's individual identities are often formed around those moral values. And here we wanted to ask, essentially, might there so a lot of times when we think about moral values and personal identity, we tend to think about the positive characteristics that are associated with that. And here we wanted to ask if there also might be some downsides to being kind of too engaged in a social identity or in your moral community, with respect to how it's going to influence how people share and consume information. So we have a number of studies on this, where we've looked at my side bias and how ideological biases influence, for example, how people are going to consume or evaluate science and reports of scientific findings. Like, just for time's sake, I'm not going to talk about any of that research. I just want to show you one specific thing that we've done recently, where we've looked at willingness to share my side information on social media, where my side information is information that is going to enhance or support one's ideology. So we've asked, essentially, are people more likely to want to share information that enhances or supports their ideology? And secondly, how moral values can really play a very specific role in that. So the way this study worked is, it's no longer in progress. We submitted this to JPSP a couple of days ago. What we did is we showed people news clippings, and in this first study, these are news clippings that are actual news clippings, and then they could be about specific kind of hot button topics, for example, gun control. And then they could be news items that is, and it's apparent just from the headline and the picture, that either they would support a typical U.S. liberal position or a typical U.S. conservative position. So, for example, if you saw that the fast development of 3D gun printing may pose a major threat to public safety, well, that's an argument, essentially, that you would find useful if you were an advocate of gun control, because that would kind of highlight the risk of too many guns circulating in the population. On the other hand, if you take something like guns are being used for self-defense as often as 10,000 times a year, if you were for gun rights in the U.S., that could be a useful argument for you to advance in order to bolster your side's position. So we took news clippings like this, and we showed them on Amazon's Mechanical Turk, and then also in future studies on Prolific Academic. And I'm not sure if people are familiar with those websites or if you use them at all.
Yeah.
The second one, everybody probably knows, but not the.
So yeah, Prolific Academic is similar in spirit to Amazon's Mechanical Turk, but we've actually shifted all of our data collection over to them. They started at Oxford University, and for whatever reason, the quality of the data that you get back tends to be substantially higher. So when we run our studies on MTurk, it's about like probably about 20% of the time we have to throw out data, whereas on Prolific Academic it's about 5%. So we just get a higher data quality from that website. But yeah, otherwise it's similar to
So this is crowd.
it's like another crowdsourcing website.
Yeah,
It's all crowdsourcing.
Keep in mind, guys. I mean, we have used annotators, paid annotation service, but for some, this might be interesting.
Yeah, and we run pretty much all. I mean, like just given the nature of my research, where we're working a lot with adults, we run like 90 to 100% of our studies on either Prolific Academic or Amazon's Mechanical Turk. We'll collect, probably 100,000 data points over the course of a year. So we're very attuned to which websites are working, which websites are not working. So yeah, so what we did here was we showed MTurkers news clippings, and we had 4 different. So 4 were like stereotypically or supportive of stereotypically liberal positions. 4 were supportive of stereotypically conservative positions, and 4 were kind of non-political control items. And the topics you can see there were like gun rights, racial equality, gender equality, and abortion. And then we would also, for each individual participant, we have a way to scale it, and we could ascertain if they were on the political left or on the political right, and then also we got their position for each individual topic, because you could be generally conservative, but then for gun rights, you can be in favor of gun control for whatever reason. So we also knew where they stood on each individual topic. Did I freeze again? Okay, here we go. So yeah, we would ask people to say like how. So the key dependent variable was how likely would you be to want to pass along this news to friends or people you like on social media. And we know from prior research that this response in these sorts of surveys, it actually correlates with people's real world behaviors. So we have a reason to suspect that whatever we find here would translate if we were to run the study, looking over millions of tweets or something, that we would find effects that mirror what we find here. And we have just different ways of asking that question. So with one experiment, we would do it on a scaled response, on the scale of 1 to 7. How likely would you be to want to share this? Or in another one, we have a more dichotomous response. It's like, would you share it or would you not share it? Which is more similar to what you do on actual social media. And then we have, so we like I was saying, we for each individual topic, we could assess if someone is pro-gun control or pro-gun rights. So yes, this is how on the issue of abortion, would you consider yourself as being absolutely pro-gun control, absolutely pro-gun rights, and you could kind of adjust the slider scale to indicate what your positioning is. And then we also asked a question about morality, and then this kind of gets to the heart of what we were looking at. Is we would also ask people to say, to what extent is that topic of absolute moral importance to you? So and I think it's important to kind of just like think through it. So it could be that you're, for example, you're absolutely pro gun control. But if I ask you, like, to what extent do you think this is like a morally important topic to you? Is it of absolute moral importance? You're like, yeah, I'm not. It's not a big deal. Like, I mean, I care about it, and I definitely know where I stand on this issue, but it's not a moral topic for me, and it's not something that I don't identify. That's not part of my social identity. So we wanted to separate those two things. Like, where are you at in terms of your position on the one hand, and on the other hand, to what extent do you consider this to be a topic of absolute moral importance to you? Yes.
Two questions. First one is out of curiosity, what is the baseline? Meaning, do leftist people in this context or right people publish more, or they are equal?
So if I'm remembering correctly, you'll actually see the data. But from memory, it's that so you publish or share more?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So if for sharing, conservatives tend on average to share, just overall share a bit more. Not really sure why.
Significantly more, or
yeah, I mean, across the different studies, I think that comes out, and that could be maybe that's because you conservatives might feel like they're disenfranchised from society in some way, and that they're not part of the elite that has the right to communicate, and that they might sometimes might. I mean, this is pure speculation.
Yeah,
but they can see the social media platforms as a way to have their voice.
US-based stuff, right?
For US-based studies, but we also see that, for example, in France.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think there is this kind of trend for conservatives to just feel like they're a bit more disenfranchised.
And the second question I have is the choice of the keywords there, like for the second part of the question. Right?
Yeah.
They are more criticism. Like they look to me like
they're similar. Yeah.
And that's the similarity. They look like the classic keywords used in news. Right? You didn't ask them a question such like, do you believe this thing is wrong? Right? You say racial equality, gender equality. You take the
well, so we say, like, on the issue of abortion, what's your position on the topic?
No, that's fine.
Or sorry, and it's a typo there. It's like, actually it should be on the issue of gun control. Where do you stand on the topic? So that you would think that normally that would correlate really strongly. Do you think it's wrong for people to have free access to guns or something, or do you think it's wrong to take away people's access to guns? Because that would normally factor into your position.
No, but I was thinking that the first question was contextualizing the survey, while the second part of the question was more of a control kind of question.
Well, so the second one is really, again, that one's really about trying to get to, and this wording here is based on lots of previous work where people have looked at moralization and how to capture the essence of what people consider to be of absolute moral importance.
Okay.
And so the wording of that is based on those studies, and that's intended to kind of capture. Okay, is this topic something that really factors into your own personal moral identity in a way?
Okay, I understand.
So yeah, so basically the finding here is that we find two distinct phenomena, and then one is probably a bit more surprising than the other one. So the first thing, so if you look on the x-axis, we have incongruent items and congruent news items. So basically, if you said that you were for gun control, if the news item was also something that supports gun control, that would be a congruent news item. And if it's something that supports gun rights, that would be an incongruent news item. And then on the y-axis, we're plotting the self-reported likelihood of sharing that news item. And then what you see, just collapsing across the blue and the red bars here, is that people are more likely to say that they would want to share a news item that's congruent with their existing ideology and their policy preferences, compared to news items that are incongruent. And then secondly, we find this really cool and interesting, and this is, I think, maybe the more novel part of this effect, where basically if you consider a topic to be of absolute moral importance, you're more biased to want to share things that support your own side. So you can see here in the blue, that's for items where individuals said that it wasn't of absolute moral importance. So people are less likely to share, but then also the difference between the congruent and the incongruent is smaller than for the red items, where there's a main effect where people are more likely overall to want to share those items, but then the slope of that line is higher, and that indicates that you get a larger difference between the congruent and the incongruent sharing preferences. Yeah, we've looked at age, and it doesn't affect the basic pattern. I mean, there could be age effects about just like the overall amount that maybe older people, generally want to share more than younger people. But then the thing that we're really interested in is whether people's morality amplifies a my side sharing preference, and then that seems to be constant across the different political orientations and also the ages and stuff.
This is really scary. It means that Twitter and Facebook, like the recommendation algorithm can really pilot the virality of news by targeting specific group of people with certain ideology.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, if you think through the implications, I agree. It's like kind of scary. So, like, for example, if you want to create a scandal in politics, you basically take an existing notion that people already have in mind, and then you put out a news story that fits with their preconceived idea, and then you know that the subgroup that you're targeting is gonna want to share that information. So that's so I think it's a very important. I think these studies are important because they make us aware of what can be successful kind of strategies on the on social media.
Silly question. These studies are based on Turk, you said, right?
This is MTurk, and I think we've also done it on prolific academic.
Social media, nothing.
So for social media, that's a real. I mean, I think I want to talk about that as a possible connection to this group. So basically, what we know is that the dependent variable that we're using, there's pre-existing work where we're getting self-reported willingness to share, and then there's existing work that shows that there's a correlation between how people respond on that measure and their real social media behavior. So that's just something that's kind of documented in the literature already, and that's why we were interested in using these willingness to share measures to begin with. But I think it would be great to actually go out and do something actually on like Twitter or Facebook and see if we can find a something analogous to these effects. So those were for real news items. I want to point out that it also works for fake news items. So we've run some individual experiments where we've instead of showing people true news, we just showed people fake news, and we get the same sort of phenomena where you get a my side sharing preference, and then you get an amplification of that my side sharing preference for topics that people consider to be of absolute moral importance.
So these people are saying, wait, what does that slide say? Sure.
So basically this is our first two studies. This was over true news items. Where you get generally there's a my side sharing preference where people are more likely to want to share news items that are congruent with their existing ideologies. But then we also find that for the topics that people say that topic is of absolute moral importance to me, it's important to my personal identity, that people are more biased to want to share information that fits their ideology.
Things that topics that fit their ideology, they want to share more.
Yeah, but they do it more when they consider that to be of absolute moral importance. So basically morals make you biased.
So here basically conservatives consider themselves more moral, and they want to
no, there's not. No, it works equally for liberals and for conservatives.
Why the liberals are lower, right? The blue is liberal, right?
No, that's so basically the blue the blue bar is those are topics that people say are of low moral importance, and the red bar is for topics that people say are of high moral importance. So you get a main effect where when people think it's of absolute moral importance, they share more. But then you also get this interaction where the slope of the red line is larger than the slope of the blue line, meaning essentially that you're more biased also by when that topic is of absolute moral importance.
So what would be an application of that?
So yes, that's what we were just saying is for example, like if I wanted to make a political scandal. What I would want to do is I would want to know what sorts of stereotypes and preconceived notions people already have in mind, and then I would want to fit the scandal that I produce to those preconceived notions, and that would make it more likely that people are going to want to people are going to share that information. So that's the sort of thing. Or if you're there's moral advertising where different companies are taking moral positions on societally divisive topics, And then that suggests that could be a successful advertising strategy. But on the one hand, then on the other hand, that also suggests that maybe we're going to end up in a very divided society. If Chick-fil-A is targeting the conservatives and Nike is targeting the liberals, and then they're really just enhancing the kind of the political polarization around products, that's probably not great for societal outcomes, even if it might be good for individual companies. So I think that these sorts of findings have lots of disturbing implications. And then yes, yeah.
So why is
Why is?
neutral?
Oh, neutral. Yeah, like we included that in the first couple of studies, just to get a sense of what people wanted to share. But those neutral items, like where those neutral items would fall, just depends a lot on which neutral items you choose. Like if it was something really boring about like nutrition or something, probably no one would share it. And then we chose like kind of funny stories that people might find interesting, but that didn't have any political content. But I don't think that neutral control condition is doing very much work, because it's sort of arbitrary what type of neutral item you end up choosing.
The news you show in these experiments were all verified.
So for the fake news, it's verified fake.
Okay.
And then for the true news, it wasn't. Basically it met the criteria of not having met the like stuff like this. No fact checking groups had committed to fact checking it, so we deemed it likely to be true.
Okay. And did you tell the fake news experiments they were fake news?
Afterwards, yeah, we debriefed people afterwards.
Did you appreciate any substantial change? Like when I know it's a fake news.
Oh, we didn't tell people beforehand that it was
That's interesting, because I noticed it was a study in Oxford that was showing that people would still say, yeah, but it's plausible. Like
yeah,
the comment.
That's actually, yeah, that study is by Sasha Alte, who's actually one of the co-authors on this.
Oh, cool.
That's Alte there. Yeah, so it's if it's plausible, if it's considered to be informative if true.
Yeah, exactly. That's and
then people are likely to want to share it. Yeah.
And it was saying if you meet someone who will share the fake news, don't approach it directly. Try to engage into. Try to make this person disprove the fake news on his own. Don't tell him it's wrong.
Yeah,
because that will just radicalize this person more.
Yeah, that's right. That's the guy from MIT. We're gonna actually talk about some of the interventions in the second part. Okay. I consider those interventions to be technologies. And maybe it's a different use of the word technology. But we're going to talk about some of that stuff in the next section. But yeah, I just wanted to point out here that like one thing that could be really cool and I think could be interesting to do with this group would be to try to run a study where we're not just doing like questionnaires and asking people to what extent would you want to share this, but actually look at real social media behavior. And then I know that like Facebook, for example, Facebook will categorize you as being like left-leaning or right-leaning. And there are websites that you can go to see how Facebook categorizes you. So you can imagine a large randomized controlled study where you feed, you take people who are categorized by the Facebook algorithm as being left-leaning or right-leaning, and you feed to 500,000 people, you feed congruent news, and to the other 500,000 you feed incongruent news, and you see if there's a difference in the sharing pattern. That could be something that would be really, really interesting and cool. And maybe there's some other way to do it that you guys would have ideas on. But that was one idea that came to mind, is something trying to connect this to real social media behavior could be really interesting.
So how would you connect this experiment?
So basically you need to be able to classify individual users as being politically left or politically right-leaning. Or if you can maybe go on even deeper into individual specific topics, and then you could there's two ways to do it. You could do one where it's just an observation, where you ask, okay, for the people who we categorize as being left-leaning, when we look at the information that they share, so you would also have to categorize the information that they share as being like left-leaning or right-leaning. For the people that we categorize as being left, are they more likely to share like left-leaning information? And the people that we categorize as right, are they more likely to share right-leaning information? That would be kind of the observational way of doing it. But then you could also do like a really large-scale A/B study, where you take the people that you've categorized beforehand as being either left or right, and then you feed in news items that are like that you've normed beforehand and you've categorized beforehand as being like left-leaning or right-leaning on a specific topic. And so you feed to the liberals either the conservative news or the liberal news, or you feed to the conservatives the liberal or the conservative news, and you see if there's a difference in the sharing pattern that emerges.
No, but would you get permission to use Facebook to do that, or this will be open outside of Facebook?
I don't know. I've never dealt with Facebook before, so I don't know. I have no idea how it works.
Yeah, no, they won't allow.
Yeah, exactly.
But you could publish ads, right?
You can publish ads, but what data you can collect about your published ad is also restricted.
Hmm.
So
Okay, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how that, or maybe over Twitter there could be something. I mean, I felt like you guys might have expertise in actually how to do that.
no, the Facebook data collection or access is very, very restricted and controlled.
Yeah.
So
And how about for
it's
Twitter? Can you do?
Twitter, you do a lot more. That is, you
Yeah.
can do surveys on Twitter.
Yeah. So maybe instead of doing it on Facebook, then maybe it's possible to do it on Twitter. Yeah.
API, and you can see the sharing of the, whether they are sharing the data or not.
For example, I would suspect that if you were, you know how like some people they put up like the pronouns that they prefer to be
Mhm.
referred to by.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good marker for liberalism.
Yeah, also
Yeah.
the flag in the name.
The flag in the name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could use a
Non-liberal.
yeah. You could use a marker like that likely correlates with the political orientation, and then you could use that as a way to guide the study.
I think Twitter already gives you, if you want, these kind of labels. There was a time when you can select what kind of user you want to pick data from if you pay. There was a time when you could access in the tool API, you could pay and get specific users if you want. Location wise, there were some extra stuff, but you can always do it on your own. I have a question on the. Is there any study that shows who is more willing to share fake news? Actually, not fake news. Who is more willing to fact check?
So that's also in the next session. So this is like one of the things that I'm really fascinated by, and I think a next step in my different studies on misinformation and fake news. So one of the things that I've noticed is that conservatives are skeptical in general of fact checkers. And then the argument that you often get back, because like a lot of the fact checking agencies, they think of themselves as being neutral, but conservatives think of them as being liberal.
Yeah, of course.
and so they're like, well, yeah, the New York Times fact checked itself and didn't find anything, but it's just like it's like I don't trust the New York Times, so I don't trust the fact checkers. And then there's a suspicion and amongst the conservative arguments that that maybe there's not so much of a bias at the level of, like, once something has been like triggered to go through the fact checking process, that is probably not so biased, but then the selection process for what should be fact checked to begin with likely is biased.
That's reasonable.
And it seems reasonable. Yeah. So like one of the things that we wanted to do or two things that we want to do. So one is we're imagining fact checking communities that are either ideologically homogenous or ideologically heterogeneous. So you can imagine on the one hand, like you'd have like Washington Post, New York Times, the Boston Times or something, create a joint fact checking community. Or you can imagine that you have Jacobin, which is far left, the New York Times and Breitbart create a fact checking community. And then we want to see if people would trust more the ideologically heterogeneous fact checkers, one. And then secondly, if you were to actually create those, or maybe create models of those, what would be the likely fact checking behavior that would emerge from that? And one of the hypotheses is that maybe once the thing goes through the process, the outcomes would be similar, but the big differences would be in what choices people apply and what to get fact checked to begin with. So there's not a lot. I don't think there's a lot on that, but I think it's I think that's an interesting and emerging topic.
One, what has happened is that there has been concerted effort in reducing the trust in the institutions, which has allowed this fake news and misinformation to stage by that, right? Because then, if you just don't trust institution that might do fact checking, well,
Then what's the point?
What's the point?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I guess the suggestion here is that by being a bit more strategic and how you with respect to the ideological diversity of the fact checkers, that you might be able to build up some trust in the institution.
We have one project, ongoing project currently, for like I said, where we do not try to decide whether something is a misinformation or not. We let that to be decided by the users. But we work on two use cases. One is public health, and particularly school superintendents and decision makers in school who have to react to misinformation about COVID or perceived misinformation about COVID. And for example, their parent groups, when they check the parents group, they would, say, I don't want mask, or I don't want vaccine for my child, or whatever. So they deal with the misinformation, in their decision making. And how do you deal with that? How the misinformation is spreading in their community and what their community believes with regards to
that's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
And how do you counter, for example, a misinformation spread that because of the misinformation already spread. Well, what should be their answer?
Yeah.
To deal with the community. The other use case is during disasters, particularly hurricanes in South Kenya. And so here, during the hurricane, again, misinformation would spread, such as there's no, gas. Gas is not, petrol is not available because of the hurricane, for example, to affect people. Other things such as access to, misinformation about whether they should evacuate or not.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
So there again, how is the misinformation being consumed by a community, and how could you?
So one of the things that we found that's very effective, but it's like generally it's like how effective an approach is going to be tends to kind of inversely scale with how costly it is. So if it's so it just scales with how costly it is. So if it's more costly, it's going to be more effective. And then the probably the most effective thing that you can do is like door to door, where you would send out people who are informed about the topic to have face-to-face discussions. So Sasha, who was one of the co-authors on this, he had this great study where they looked at misinformation around nuclear energy and genetically modified foods, and then through kind of extensive one-on-one chats between scientists and citizens, he could empirically show that you could get changes over like an hour in kind of deep in that discussion. It's very costly is the issue.
Yeah. There was I don't know what was the name of the effect. It has a name I'm a nuclear advocate.
Okay, yeah, me too.
I'm a nuclear advocate.
Yeah.
And we were sharing this news that for any fake news, it takes 10 hours for any misinformation, any single misinformation takes 10 hours to disprove it. Like there was a metric measure, like you need a title to trigger some action on social media.
Yeah.
You need an article for this like specifically disprove every single
claim that's made in the thing.
claim.
I think there's a general discrepancy between like true news and fake news. Like when people say it's just easier to spread bullshit.
It's just the institution or the scientist, for example. How are you going to change any views? A layperson simply just does not trust the scientists to change the view.
But they are responsive to arguments. So it's like if you just say I'm a scientist, trust me, that doesn't work. But if you can give good arguments, then people will respond to that. So the argument quality matters, and that's one thing.
Is there a substantial number of people respond to that, or many people are just closed and they would not be receptive to any argument?
There's different. So there's different, and I think again that's my experience from the political campaigning that it comes back to it. So like the way there's usually three different types. So one type is someone who might be like on your side, but just not informed. So like somebody who would want to vote for your candidate, but who doesn't know what time to show up for the election. So you just give them the piece, like a small piece of information, but you helping them to go in a direction where they're already inclined to go anyway. There are some people who are like just generally undecided, and then in those cases, advancing an argument can move the dial a little bit. And then there are people who are like, militant supporters of the opposition. And for them in general, it's considered to be just a waste of time to spend too much time on those people. So you end up wanting to target, you target differently depending on the profile and then the strategy that you're going to adopt. It changes depending on the type of person that you're confronted with.
But with the polarization, there are more and more people of the third type.
Yeah.
This polarization, people are reading quick news and their mind, but
there's also some research showing that like
because of bubble effect, they're just not going out.
But we can also there's a great group out of New York called More in Common, and then they look at perceptions of like political outgroups, and then what they show is that if they ask people to say, like, they'll ask like liberals to say, like, how extreme do you think a typical conservative is on the topic of immigration, for example? And then you'll actually just ask the conservatives the same question, but then you'll say, like, where do you stand on immigration? And it turns out that like the political outgroup tends to be a lot less radical than we imagine them to be, and that ends up being true for both sides of it. So there's some hope that there actually is some communication that's possible across the political boundaries, and that it could be also a part of our psychology that we overestimate how difficult that's going to be.
Also because I think in design we tend to think that there exist these people that have strong opinions on the other side, but we are these people. I might have a strong opinion on nuclear power and have a completely different opinion on gay rights, and I consider myself a leftist person because of my opinion on the gay rights.
Oh yeah.
But my position in nuclear power is closer to the far right, and I don't know about it. For example, in my case, I used to be against nuclear because my family was against nuclear.
Yeah.
My family is leftist.
Yeah.
So I thought that was the right thing to do in the leftist side. And
from which country?
Italy.
Italy, okay.
Which is
fits in the European.
Yeah. Against nuclear, right?
Yeah.
And I end up encounter the content because a person that I was following for other reasons started disseminating it. And I was like, oh, how many things I thought they were right just because rightist just because I was I'm born.
Because that was the doctrine.
Yeah. So that we are these people and we are not all the time, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is subject to fake news, even us, even if you think we're not because we're upper educated.
But like attitude change in general is very difficult, and I'm convinced that it's often impossible to change someone's mind on a politically or ideologically charged topic in a single instance, and instead it tends to be something that happens over longer periods of time. And if I think about myself and different issues where I've changed my own mind, and maybe you have that for nuclear power. I'm the same way. I changed on nuclear. I changed on religion. I've changed on immigration to some extent. But then all of those are slow and over long, in-depth conversations with people I trust and people who give good arguments. And then I'm really pushing myself. Can I find the counter argument? So it's a long process, I think, and it could still be worth engaging at the beginning of a process, but it's costly. It's difficult to do at scale. And then maybe, just the one final thing on that point before we go to the next is like, maybe the one thing that I've seen that can work along those lines is chatbots, because you can so the reason that the personalized conversations tend to work is that we can people on the fly can find arguments that are relevant to the person that they're speaking with. If the person has a certain misconception about genetically modified foods, like, oh, genetically modified foods cause cancer. And it's like, well, no, like you're confusing genetic modification with like maybe pesticides, for example. So you can give a counter argument that kind of really precisely targets what's relevant for the person that's in front of you, and that's difficult to do at scale if you're just giving out a standard piece of information with a text document. But with a chatbot, and if you're clever about it, and if you do the AI in the right way, you can actually target the arguments to be relevant to the individual that's engaging with the chatbot, and then you can get more movement on people's on people's attitudes in that way. And that's a I think that's a proven technique where I've seen some evidence that suggests that works.
Something to this, an idea to hold on to. We do extensive work with chatbots.
Right. Yeah, that's why I mentioned it. Yeah.
And other area, not for political or other reasons, but in general, something, particularly the work is on how do you construct the next question to the user.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
that's not easy, right? You're not asking 20 questions and expecting answers. That doesn't work. People don't hold. So you have to understand the person's, personalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind the previous answers. Keep in mind the knowledge of the domain.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah,
So
that's very interesting. Yeah, it's like it connects to all the like relevance theory work, but with Dan Sperber. So there's this general idea that people are going to be more engaged in information that they find relevant, but then mapping out in detail what does it mean for a piece of information to be relevant for a person given the background. That's a very difficult problem.
Kaushik, you may want to look up on this relevance theory just to justify or explain the importance of what we are doing. Is he here? Can you hear?
But I can I'll send some references, and then maybe you could forward it to the student. So I don't have a lot of time left on the parking meter.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna try to just like maybe just give a preview, and then I could finish the talk at some other point. You just keep going iteratively. So I just want to give a kind of a preview of what we're doing in terms of creating and testing scalable technologies. So one ongoing project is I'm creating a crowdsourcing platform that's really centered on Africa. Africa is probably the least represented continent in terms of data collection and publications and psychological science. I think there was a study that came out a year ago where they looked across the major journals in psychological science, and something like 1% of the data that was published came from Africa. But it's not 1% of the world's population, obviously. So I consider this, data collection out of Africa to be crucial if we want to understand the universals of human behavior. That's a continent where we need to understand: are they similar? Are they not similar? And in what respects to how populations from other areas are responding and reacting to different things. So basically we're just doing like the MTurk we started in Morocco, and then we'll go to Senegal as probably the next country. And then we've added some functionalities that are a bit different to what you see in prolific academic or MTurk. So and these are kind of responses to specific challenges in Africa, where you have really large percentages of the population that are not regularly connecting to the internet. They do have a cell phone. So we're creating mobile apps that would allow us to gather data kind of quickly and easily. And we also have some we're interacting with a company that's doing prediction markets, where this is outside of the realm of cognition, but there's some private industry interest in this as well, where people want to anticipate fluctuations especially in demand in Africa for fertilizer and for other sorts of goods and services. And there's just not a lot of good data that's coming out of that. So we're going to train people with this mobile app to participate in prediction markets. So like farmers, for example, to predict whether they or their community are likely to consume X amount of fertilizer in the next season. We get that information, and they're making kind of bets and trading shares. And they'll get, if they're good bettors, they get extra money. So they're incentivized to be accurate in their predictions, and we know that's a method that tends to work well. And then we can use that to try to guide different corporate and governmental strategies. So we have it's kind of a large project. This just starting. We're just creating the startup now. We have I think it's about 300,000 or 400,000 euros of investment. And that's something that should be taking off in the next few years. So I just kind of wanted to advertise it. And then
Fantastic. I mean, I'm well aware of some projects like Ushahidi in the space of web-based crisis coordination.
yeah, totally. Yeah, the crisis stuff could be super interesting. Yeah.
So Ushahidi is a very well-known platform.
Yeah.
And people share the data related to crisis using Ushahidi.
Yeah, that's cool.
It is a strong adoption in Africa.
What's the name of the platform?
Ushahidi. Ushahidi.
US. Yeah, if maybe you can just send me the name later. So that's yeah, and then maybe one connection here is that there seems to be, at least what I gleaned from the talk yesterday, there's some interest in well-being. USHAHIDI. Yeah. HIDI. Cool.
So you can go to ushahidi.com. It's an open source software application which utilizes user-generated reports to collaborate.
Cool. Yeah, and one connection there is that one of the initial funders for that project, they're specifically interested in well-being, mental health, and physical health in the workplace. So there's an overlap. There's an overlap in
my
topical
brother
interest.
has a company, SOPAC, that is on social impact measurement.
Social impact measurement.
So when humanitarian efforts, when foundations invest money for social causes, what is the impact?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's very interesting, and this is certainly relevant because this is a way to, these human responses are a way to assess impact. So yes, I wanted to advertise that project, and we could always come back to it and talk about it in future weeks. And then the second one that I wanted to just advertise, and I'm not going to have time to walk you through it because that would take another probably 45 minutes. But just to say that there's a new project that's on the horizon where I'm waiting right now to hear back about the funding for it, where we want to, and this is totally different from anything that we've talked about so far, but there's relevant to some people doing maybe the computer vision stuff. I'm supposed to meet with Ruwan later.
Yeah. And
I think that maybe some of his interests could overlap with that. Where we're looking at measuring and enhancing soccer IQ through applications of kind of basic cognitive development and cognitive neuroscience. So I just want to give a sense of what this is about. So if you look at a video like this is a clip of Zinedine Zidane, where it looks like nothing, the action that takes place. But he takes the ball and he's going to pass the ball into this space. His body is facing this way. He has to know without looking where this player is running and where these players are positioned, where the open space is, and he has to be able to anticipate a chain of events in a soccer match, and he has to do it in a split second. And there's the soccer community. There are standardized metrics for things like movement speed, movement with the ball, movement without the ball, technical ability, but there are no standardized metrics for perceptual awareness, decision-making speed, and on the cognitive side of it, despite the fact that there's kind of a long-standing idea that these sorts of cognitive reflexes and cognitive abilities can provide an edge at the very top level of the game. So what we're trying to do is to develop a standardized measure of that would allow big soccer clubs to anticipate how a player is going to develop over time, and if they're going to show a higher level of cognitive capacity on the pitch than other players, and then two, right away they might be able to provide a competitive edge. So we break some of this stuff down into the ability to represent visible players and objects and peripheral vision, representation of players who are out of view, spatial awareness,
I don't know how to get home.
integration of dynamic scene information for fast decision making. And then we're developing, we're employing existing tasks from cognitive neuroscience, which are well known. For example, the multiple object tracking task, where you have, for example, objects that blink and then they start moving around, and you have to keep track of those objects. So what we're going to try to do is to take assessments from tasks like these, and then through like large scale randomized controlled study, where we have basically a smart team and a dumb team, but the two teams are equated in terms of their physical and technical ability, to see if our measures are capable of predicting outcomes in the matches. And then one of the things that we want to do there is we want to do video analysis of the players, of the individual players, and see, and that would be looking at things like number of passes, number of shots, pass completion percentage. So taking different event categories that typically code for desirable outcomes, and then assessing whether our metrics are able to predict some of the individual level impacts.
This is very interesting. A lot of confusion, a lot of possibilities here. Can analogy-based learning improve the cognitive skills in a very, think about it. Very challenging. She works on
Analogy-based reasoning. Yeah, there is an aspect of decision making also in soccer. So for example, players need to be good bettors. So there can be things where you can, for example, you can try a risky pass, and then maybe 9 times out of 10 that pass is not going to work, but 1 time out of 10 it'll work, and if it does work, it's likely to lead to a goal. And so you would want, and there's a tendency sometimes to want to take the safe option as opposed to the option that's going to give you the highest expected value in terms of the action choice. And then getting people to reason about those actions in the right way is a challenge, and maybe something about analogy-based reasoning could be useful for that sort of problem.
This one reminds me of the movie Moneyball.
A little bit, but it's like Moneyball. It's a different sort of Moneyball. Like Moneyball is really about, there's a player evaluation aspect to Moneyball. Whereas here, what we're doing, but that's kind of looking at a lot of data that looks at physical attributes and sometimes technical attributes, and then relating that back to, you're looking for good buys relative to the market value. And then here it's kind of a Moneyball deep dive into cognition, and I think that's something that's very.
You want to know, like Moneyball, the assessment was you want to buy runs, right? Rather than buy match. You want to buy match, so you want to buy runs. It's like you want to buy.
Yeah, it's like on base average, as opposed to, because people, that was a neglected stat, which was on base average as opposed to batting average, which is the thing that most people focused on, for example.
Yeah, I see. So here you just say you are supposing that exists like a hidden. Hidden average.
Yeah, it's like we did enough statistics, and we were smart enough in how we did our statistics, we might be able to find different stats that are predicting outcomes. Whereas here we're manufacturing a new type of stat, I guess is the way to think about it.
You can do also, like I see aside the practical strategic approaches, you can also enhance the experience of who's watching the match.
Yeah.
Like a goal is going to happen soon, right?